I am going to tell you a little bit about myself before we get into some of the small business type supports that are out there through the Queensland Small Business Commissioner's Office. But I guess just to start off with, across Australia there's currently 2.5 million small businesses. 45% of them are not profitable, 75% of them make less than the average wage, which is about $90,000. On average, they're owned by men over the age of 50. And look, only 35% are actually female-led or run, which is a little bit concerning. We know that nationally at the moment, there's about an uptake of becoming a small business owner of probably 8%. Which in comparison to around the 1970s sat at about 35%. So we are certainly seeing people shy away from becoming small business owners, which, at the end of the day, in Queensland alone, they contribute about $119 billion to the economy, and nationally they contribute a third of GDP. So we absolutely need our small business owners. And I guess from the perspective of this particular group, we know in Queensland that at the moment the top 4 industries that are represented in small business, it's construction, professional services, agriculture and rentals, all of which don't consider themselves small businesses. Often they will identify as part of their profession as instead of being a business owner, and sometimes that just means that they either avoid some of the supports or don't see some of the supports that are out there solely by the fact that they don't consider themselves to be small business owners. So I'll take you through some of that as we progress. This is a quote that I like to base sort of all of my decisions around. I think that most of us are the sum of the people that surround us. And I think that where I am today would never have happened without the support and love of the people that were around me. And I think that wherever you are in your journey, whether you're beginning it, whether you're at the end of it, it really is about making sure that the people that surround you very much represent parts of who you are and are likely to play some part as to where you're going. So you have to be careful about the people that are around. And for me, it is very much about those people being the sum of all of us. So I started my story in Western Sydney. I grew up as part of a single mum family. I was raised primarily by my Oma and Opa, my wonderful Dutch grandparents that migrated out here now well over 50 years ago. And they brought their 3 children at the time on a boat, and then they had a 4th child while they were here. Interestingly, my grandmother was all of 5 foot and lovingly referred to as the General, mainly because she ran absolutely everything, including my grandfather. And in fact, when she was young, she ran off to Indonesia to become a Red Cross nurse against her father's wishes, and then had to get the permission of the Dutch Admiral of the Navy to allow them to get married. Of course, she convinced him to do so, and then they got married. So for me, I came from a long line of female leaders where nothing was ever off the table. I was never told that there were any restrictions as to what you could achieve. And even if you wanted to achieve it and everyone else said no, particularly those people that you were meant to follow, you had a choice and you could make your own destiny. So I think that set quite an interesting standard for where and probably how I ended up where I am. Now, when I was about 16, my mother suffered from a major brain tumour. And of course, when you're part of a single mother family, that is very, very difficult. And I guess that experience taught me that what I really wanted to do in life was primarily help people. And when you're, a kid that's particularly good at English, you're pretty good at maths, there's typically a path that you're likely to follow, whether it's going to be becoming a doctor or becoming a lawyer, amongst other things. And for me, I decided to go down that legal path. And my mother did, she survived, she's very able and still, very much alive. But her hard work and just her struggle through that period certainly taught me that I wanted more and that I wanted to look after her. So a lot of what my decision making was probably from that point onwards was very much dictated by the fact that I wanted to help more people, not just like her and like myself, but just in general, I had a great sort of burning need to want to go out in the world and just make it easier for other people. So this is my Oma and my mum, and of course me and my mum. And a part of that role model network also included my aunt, who was a little bit like Neighbourhood Watch. So there wasn't really much that I could get up to that wasn't quite allowed, because she would always find out about it. And I think having those restrictions and probably just having a clear rule book and knowing that sort of, what was the right thing to do became very much part of my value system early on. And it was very much greatly shaped by these women. Now, at our dinner table, if you know many Dutch people, you'll know that it's very opinionated and that there is nothing off the table. You're able to say whatever it is that you think, and there's very much healthy debate. Now, I learned from that experience that, of course, my opinion was valued, and it certainly was, very much valid, whether or not I had a different opinion from my Opa or from my Oma or from my mum or whoever it might have been around. And I guess I always expected that once I went through law school, innately I would, go into a role, and then that is how my experience would be in the world, that your opinion was always valued. But of course that's not quite the case when you go into legal practice, because of course legal practice is primarily, well, at the time and still is, it's quite male dominated. And in fact, the first client meeting I ever had, I remember the partner that I worked for said to me, "Don't ruin your look of intelligence by speaking." I soon learned that perhaps it wasn't quite the same as what it had been at home. It certainly wasn't the same that my opinions would always be heard or listened to or even, considered. It didn't really matter how much hard work you put in. It was really just about sometimes following a hierarchy or a line, which I wasn't particularly good at, probably because of my Oma. So from there I went looking for a new practice, and I thought that if I went to a larger, more sophisticated practice outside of maybe the building and construction industry, that I would find that. Unfortunately, what I found was that as you progressed, as you went to bigger practices, it was not always the case. And in fact, there was a certain level of burnout. And I think for women, we tend to typically try and do absolutely everything. Sometimes we learn early that we get to do it our way, and we find ways to do it which provide us joy, and that, gives us more. But in this case, I became incredibly ill. So I was sitting at about 52 kilos. I couldn't, put weight on. I had a thyroid condition that needed to be radiated, and I just decided that enough was enough and I needed a change. So I decided that I would go, again, looking for a different way to do legal practice and look for a culture that probably suited me. Luckily for me, I found a role that was an in-house role that was part of Australian Industry Group. And I started with working with businesses, still providing them legal advice, but in a very different capacity. Because when you work for a union, typically people will preemptively come to you with problems. They'll tell you about what's happening in their business, as opposed to, I'm right in the middle of litigation and I need you to appear. And you start to learn more about different industries, different businesses, amongst other things. And I was lucky enough that I found an incredible mentor by the name of David Miller, who is still there. And he was somebody that sort of repaired my faith in probably the profession, just simply by being a mentor, as opposed to providing directions and then, not being happy with an outcome, maybe because they weren't particularly good at communicating or amongst other things. David took the time and certainly worked with me around what is it that I want to do, how did I want to make those next steps in my career. And we know for many women that that is precisely what typically occurs. For young women in particular, when you look at all of the studies, when you look at men and women of a certain age, they will all tell you that they want the same things in terms of career progression. But the one difference is that young women often require more mentoring to decide to make that step. They won't necessarily just make it. On the screen here is a list of words, and at this time when I was recovering, I hadn't been particularly well, I was learning how to develop a work-life balance, I decided to join a sporting team, just for something really different. Now, I am not a sporting person. I look a little bit like a praying mantis when trying to run. I certainly am not coordinated, and I've never been particularly good at team sports. And so this was quite a challenge for me because I'd never really decided to be part of a team. Now I picked an unusual team, and part of that structure was that you had to go through a whole heap of sports psychology. And it was about picking 5 words that you wanted other people to view you as and how you wanted to hold your values and keep and maintain them throughout whatever changes happened in your life. So I picked my 5 words, which were determined, compassionate, calm, kind, and of course, fulfilled. And so what I would do with those words is I would use them to hold myself accountable. So instead of deciding, was I going to stay in law, was I going to, continue with this sporting team, whatever the decisions were, whatever they were hard, whenever I was having a bad day, I would take those values or those 5 words and I would question myself, would a determined person do this? Would a calm person make this decision? Would a calm person react in this particular way? Would a compassionate person look at this? And that actual structure really changed my mindset as to how I would make decisions. Now, interestingly, the sporting team that I chose was probably not something that was the most, common sporting team. And in fact, I became a bodybuilder. Now, a low-end bodybuilder, I really only ever placed 4th, but the process actually taught me one thing. There's a whole heap of psychological studies around the fact that if you power pose for X amount of time per day, it increases your self-esteem quite significantly. Aside from that, I could not think of anything more terrifying than appearing in front of about 300 people wearing very little clothing. And I thought if I could do that, then there was absolutely nothing that I couldn't do. And it was a little bit about reminding myself about where I'd come from. And when this happened, at that time, I got a call saying, we are looking for a head of legal for the National Retail Association. Seeing the introduction, the NRA, not the rivals, the retailers. Now, they said to me, we're looking for a head of legal. We think you'd be really good. And I said, I think you need someone else. Here's 3 names. And they said, no. We really think that we should talk to you. Because at that time, I was going through this change and I certainly was looking to increase my self-esteem, but I too still needed that additional support from mentors. And I went to a very close friend of mine who'd actually sent them to call me for this job, and I said, I really think they need someone else. And they said, what have you got to lose? And so I decided I'd take the job. Now, within 12 months of becoming the head of the National Retail Association's legal team, I then became their CEO. At the same time, they had the same conversation with me. We think you'd be a really good CEO. And I said, I think you should find someone else. Here are 3 names. So I hadn't quite learnt my lesson. But at that time, I was very, very lucky that I had a very secure board who were primarily men over the age of 50 that said to me, you won't do this without friends. And they absolutely meant it. There was no way as a lawyer I was prepared to run a business as big as the National Retail Association. It had a registered training organisation. I understood the legal practice. It had a membership arm. It had a government arm. I'd never really dealt with government too much at that time. And this group of men, there was 1 woman on the board, this group of men and 1 woman supported me through that and provided me with lots of different skills. And they certainly grew me over a period of 7 years. Now, the first 2 were absolutely the hardest of my life. I was terrified that I was going to be, whatever decision I made was going to result in my 50 staff losing their jobs, because it was a pretty difficult time financially. I'd come in, the previous CEO had left it with quite a significant deficit. I had a lot of hard work to do. And whilst I was used to building business within a legal practice, I absolutely was not used to reading a balance sheet. I wasn't used to understanding FBT, GST, anything else that comes with it, government funding, where to find grants, how to even write a grant application. And so I really had to learn on my feet, and I was very, very lucky that I had some incredible mentors at that time. So all I can say to you is if you are in that position to mentor young women in particular, please put in the time, because we can't be what we can't see. And I got very, very lucky. And lovingly used to do this presentation and call myself the accidental CEO, because it was absolutely by accident. I was in the right place at the right time. But when we look at CEOs, often we think, you've made it. You've absolutely made it. You're running a business. You know, we see you on TV at Christmas time talking about the retail figures. You must have it really easy. Things must be going really well. But what they don't talk about, particularly for women, is probably this concept of toxicity at the top. It actually gets much harder for leaders, particularly women. Now, for me, I was probably one of 3 heads of employer unions at the time, female heads of unions at the time. And what that meant was that not only was I walking into boardrooms, like many of you, where there was very few women at the table, but I was also in a position where, a little bit like politics, you are very much on show. And people often will use things that are said in the press or things that the organisation is doing to create drama within a political spectrum. In this particular case, this was actually my first week back from my second round of maternity leave. And we had a very aggressive competitor who was very used to using the media in particular ways, and they had gone to the 7:30 report with a false report about something that we had supposedly done. Now, of course, the 7:30 report don't always give you details, so I agreed to do the interview, and it was alleged that I'd paid a certain amount of money in order to obtain a contract. I'd never actually attended the lunch. I was having a baby at the time, but they never gave me the date. Aside from that, with the money that we had tendered for and acquitted and gone through all the processes for, we'd actually trained 48,000 retail staff in how to deal with an event of terrorism, because the last 8 terrorist attacks had been in retail precincts. Of course, that is not what was reported, and certainly not what was on Twitter. And I guess I raise that with you because sometimes when you are in a position of leadership, or when you're watching someone in a position of leadership, you don't know what they're actually going through. And it can be very, very difficult. It can absolutely take its toll. And I think that burnout factor is very real. For me, when I was leading a team, it was also about making sure that they couldn't see any cracks forming, because you need to bring them with you and you need to make sure that they can get on with what they're doing and still be proud of the brand that they represent. I was very lucky that I had a very long-standing team who'd been there for a very long time, who knew how much work we'd done, how much hard work we put in to return ourselves to surplus, and that we were running a very, very effective business. And in fact, if we weren't, I think we probably never would have had press like this, because our competitors wouldn't have been watching what we're doing. And it's about sort of gaining that perspective if you ever are in that position. And interestingly, it really does come back to what I was saying about values. So I'd never changed how I'd behaved. I still showed up to everything. I still did what I said I was going to do. I still remained determined to change laws that were going to help small businesses and retailers and customer service facing businesses for the better. I continued to do the things that I had done for 5 years at that point in time. And in fact, what happened was industry rallied. That same year that all of that press came out and continued to come out every 2 weeks for 18 months, I won an award. I became the most, I think it was influential person in retail that year as part of the VIP Retail Awards. I was able to support the McConaughey properties through basically repairing all of Lismore Square after it had been completely flooded in. And those people that I continued to show up for, no matter how hard it was, absolutely showed up for me. And I think that that is key when you are a business owner, or if you are a leader, or no matter what you're doing, or if you're on that path, you need to make sure that you have really good networks. Coming to things like this, finding cheerleaders that are going to stand with you, not when things are good, right? You know, Oprah talks about you don't want people that are going to ride in the limo, you want people that are going to ride, you know, in a hearse when things get really bad. This is what it is, right? It's incredibly important to have those people that know exactly who you are on your best day and on your worst day. And for me, that is what having really core values is about. It's about being consistent and showing up, and it doesn't shift even when there is a storm. Now, interestingly, this is, I think, a quote from Julia Gillard about knowing your purpose, and I think that that is incredibly true. In whatever you do, whatever you are trying to find joy in, it is about knowing your purpose, because that is what will will keep you going. And my uncle always says to me, you know, your conscience is your shoreline. And I think that is very much the truth. And when it gets hard, you have to know exactly who you are and where you came from. Now, after this part of sort of my story and, you know, getting to that 7 years where I was definitely becoming quite burnt out, I, in between all of this, had these two beautiful children. They are now 3 and 5. And I guess that's the reason that, for me, I continue to do these things. It's the reason that I continue to make big decisions, to take big roles, even though they're young kids, because I want my daughter to have someone that she can become. I want her to know that there's a path for you, no matter what you want to do. And I want my son to understand that, you know, women can have as big a careers as, you know, dad has, or there's no imbalance there. And I guess the biggest question that I always get asked is sort of, you know, how do you do it all? And the answer to that is I don't do it all. I have lots of support. I'm really lucky that I was able to find, you know, a nanny when Minnie was 4 months old, who is now the godmother of my son Fred, and who's been with me for 5 years, and whose parents come to Christmas every year, and, you know, we're like a little family. And I don't do it on my own. I do it with my husband and with Kirsty and with my mum, and sometimes with my friends who are my cheerleaders, and they pop in and, you know, do child pickup and all sorts of things. It's about making sure that you have that network. No one is meant to do anything on your own, and that includes business owners. So after I left the NRA, I had a brief hiatus, and I think what I would say to you is sometimes when you feel like you just have to get out to get some perspectives, that's sort of where I got to at the end of the National Retail Association. And I actually took a job, of all things, with Air Services Australia. Please don't throw things at me if your house is under a flight path. But it was a very, very interesting experience. In fact, it was probably the best break or holiday that I had had, because no one knew who I was in aviation. No one had seen the press. No one had any idea who this retail association was. They could not care less. What they cared about was what was happening with the aviation firefighters, what was happening with the air traffic controllers, and I was actually able to do some really, really good work and lead a wonderful team. Now, my dream when I went to the National Retail Association was to become a commissioner. Now, I thought I would become an industrial relations commissioner, and I would sit there every day and I would, you know, watch people fight out their problems. And I soon realised that I would probably become very bored. And so before this role, as I was exiting the NRA, this role, the Small Business Commissioner's role, was advertised, I made the application. Now, if any of you watched the news during COVID, you would know that I was very, very vocal about some of the decisions that the current government has made. And when I made that application and I went through the interview process and then I didn't hear from them for 8 months, I thought, yeah, they saw that name on the list and thought, we're not going to hire that woman. However, while I was at Air Services, I got a call about 2 days before the end of my probation to say, you're still keen, are you interested? And so I got the dream job. I got to become the Queensland Small Business Commissioner. And I think that sometimes it's about holding on to some of those dreams. And even when things get hard, and even when you get derailed briefly up a different path, sometimes things just bring you back to where you're meant to be. And so I got very, very lucky in that I ended up with the dream role. I became the Queensland Small Business Commissioner. Now, I guess for many of you might know what that means. And what it means is that I became a statutory appointment. I sit outside of government and I report into the Small Business Minister about what's happening in Queensland. We're set up to enhance the operating environment for small business across Queensland and to minimise the time and costs associated with dispute. I get to travel across Queensland meeting small business owners from every single industry and hearing about their stories and their businesses, and then I get to go back and agitate or advocate at a council, state and federal level to get a better outcome. It is absolutely the best role. But what does it mean for you guys? There is so much support out there. And I guess our team is split into two. We have an assistance team that takes complaints and calls from across the state, and then we can put you through alternate dispute resolution, whether it's a small debt claim, whether it's an issue with a landlord. Whether it's simply I'm looking for a grant, I've got a big idea, I need a piece of equipment, is there any funding? We connect you to wherever you need to go. The second part of our team is our advocacy team, and part of that means that, as I said, we advocate into those different levels, and we operate what's called the Small Business Friendly Council program. At the moment, we've got 47 of the 77 councils on across Queensland who have agreed and committed to becoming more small business friendly. What that means for you in this room is no matter where you are, there is often grants, there is often support, even at council level. Moreton Bay City Council now has some of the most amazing support you could possibly think of. They have AI that generates data about your businesses, they've got workshops, they have grants, they have all sorts of things. But so too do really little councils like Winton, who, you would think only look after dinosaurs, but no, in fact, they have a whole raft of supports for small business. They survey their small businesses and they've committed to a 2-year strategy over the next so many years. So it is a very, very interesting role. But some of the support at the moment out of the Queensland Government is the Mentors for Growth, which you heard talked about today. And we actually have 330 free mentors that you can access on any topic. If you want to do digital marketing, there's someone there. If you want to learn how to write grants, there's somebody there. If you want to scale your business, look at franchising, we will connect you to an expert and they'll provide you an hour and a half of free time. We get some really rave reviews about those mentors. We also have free financial counsellors. Now, we find that for many small business owners, you get into business to do, in your case, whatever part of medicine that you're in. You are absolutely not there to learn about GST and taxation, but these financial counsellors are there to help you. They will help you optimise what's happening in your business, particularly with expenses, amongst other things. If you find yourself in difficulty and you need to negotiate a payment plan for taxation, they will do all of that with you. They can also give you up to $5,000 to help you with support or advice, if you need it, around finances. So they are a really useful tool. We have the same thing for wellness coaches. We know many small business owners are absolutely burnt out, probably as burnt out as what I was when I left the NRA. And these wellness coaches, again, have up to $5,000 that they can provide to get you help, to get services, amongst other things. They can also work with you around work-life balance. It could mean anything. The person will talk to you, they will counsel you, and they'll work out what the best plan is for you. So it's not a cookie cutter situation. There is also one in every region and they will come out to you as well, and it's the same with the financial counsellors. There are lots of different grants available. In fact, the Minister has just announced $2.5 million. That is expressions of interest open on the 6th of September, and that's for up to $20,000. They're a business boost grant. So they have changed the system. You no longer have to put in lots and lots of work up front. You put in an expression of interest as to what you might do, and then they assess that, and then you go through all of the other hard work. So I would really encourage you, if there's something that you need in your business, if you want to build a website, if you want to invest in a particular type of machinery, whatever it is, have a look at those grants, because they really do get some really great results. And as I said, they're just about to open again. Now, you have heard about micro-credentials. At the moment, there are 2 free courses available through the Sunshine Coast, which include workforce planning and business planning. You can do them anywhere. You don't have to attend in person. They are online, and you do get a credential. If you don't finish it the first time, you can log in and try again. There's no number of times in terms of how many times you can make an attempt, because we know everyone gets busy. There's also a whole heap of building your business free courses through TAFE as well. So if it's just something that you're struggling with in terms of being able to work on your business, some of these free courses are excellent. And I actually know that Business Chamber Queensland has just announced a new workforce one as well. So if you're trying to create an employee value proposition, if you want to look at retention to keep staff in your practice, then Business Chamber Queensland has a whole raft of free resources that is currently funded until April by the Queensland Government as well. So what can you expect to see from the Queensland Small Business Commissioner's Office? So I am quite a new appointment. I came in December of last year. I've been in for about 6 months. And so next week we will actually launch our first report that will look at all the public-facing data for small business in Queensland, as well as by region. We will also provide profit margin ratios and employee margin ratios so that you can benchmark where you are by industry, and it looks at the top 20 industries in small business. what we know is that Queensland is bucking the trend. There's about 9% of people getting into small business here. We also know that out of the top 20 industries, that 19 of them have increased by about, if not more, 10%. There is only one that has declined, and it's transport. We also can tell you which local governments are the best places to open a business and who's booming and who's not. So all of that will come out next week. We also have a whole raft of new industry roundtables, and I guess the reason for that is about creating awareness, but for us it's also about staying in contact with those regions. So we have a small business industry roundtable made up of peak bodies. We also have a regional roundtable that is based on the modified Monash model, so the most disadvantaged, the most advantaged, and everyone in between, to hear from them about what they're up to. And then the third one is landlords, because unusually landlords are coming to us and saying, what else have you got? We can give them deferred rent, we can, look at all sorts of other subsidies, but it's not really getting to where it needs to be. What other supports do you have? So it's become a very free-flowing conversation with some of those landlords, which I don't think it has been in the past. Our assistance team have just developed 30 new resources. They'll be translated into the top 4 languages in Queensland, because we don't want any small business left behind, no matter where they are or what community they're in. And we'll also look at dynamic translations as well, because we want people to be able to access, and we know that certainly in multicultural communities there are whole rafts of businesses that just simply are not accessing grants, services, supports, and we want to be able to tap into them. And then, of course, finally, there is our advocacy, and we've just commissioned our first behavioural study with Central Queensland University to look at the psychology of small business owners from when they enter, when they grow, and when they exit, because we know when things get hard, we don't hear from them, and we want to know why. So we want to get to them before the pointy end, and we think that this study, we know that it's one of the very few that has been done on small business owners. There's lots on HR, there's lots on entrepreneurs, but not much on small business owners. So we want to know more about them. And of course, we'll be producing that, what is currently called the Beyond COVID report, but we will be producing quarterly data analytics reports about small businesses in Queensland to give you more idea. Of course, we're always looking to expand the Small Business Friendly program as well, and we're hoping to expand it to regulators, because it probably doesn't surprise you if you've ever built anything that we get lots of complaints about the Queensland Building and Construction Commission. There's lots of issues around, liquor licensing laws, amongst other things, and other regulators, and we do play in that space when it comes to advocacy. We work quite closely with all the other small business commissioners in each state and territory, as well as the Ombudsman as well. And we advocate on federal matters, including taxation, ACCC, ASIC, and of course Fair Work, to try and get a better outcome, or at least get those departments to look through a small business friendly lens to make things more palatable, easier to access, try and get them to put those events before or after work so that people can attend, so that that education component gets out there. But there's, when we look at it nationally, there's not too much difference between what's happening in Queensland at the moment and the other states. And no matter where we go, we hear skills shortage, housing crisis, and then cost of living. Freight in particular, lack of childcare to get women into the workforce is another issue that we hear, and certainly lots about electricity, cost of labour, all of those things as well. So we're working hard on a lot of, there's a lot happening at the moment, but I guess I'm very lucky that it is absolutely a labour of love, and I get a lot of joy from it. And I have been gifted an incredible team, which is absolutely a credit to the previous Small Business Commissioner, Marie Adshed.